here. So I'm not all alone here. I think there's still one missing, but Sebastian, you want to sit there? Florian? I think we leave this chair open. He's a little bit late. Yeah, next. Okay, great. So, thank you very much. Here he is. I was already missing you, Ben. Happy to have you here. So, I'm very honored that I can moderate this wonderful panel. We have high-level speakers and panelists here this morning, and I'm extremely proud that we can have all kinds of different perspectives here. So let me first of all introduce our panelists. I start with Ben Granjé. He is chairman of the Belgian Investor Association, VFB. So very happy to hear from you the retail investor side. Also warm welcome to Andrea Beltramello from the EU Commission. I know you have a hard position because we already heard a lot from our EU Commissioner. Very impressive and very interesting news. But I'm sure that you can go more into detail than she can. So we're very curious to find out more about it. I'm also honored to welcome from the Nasdaq Copenhagen, the president, Nikolaj Kosakewitsch. Well done. Okay. What not as difficult, I think. I also welcome Florian, I have to look again, Prucker, who is the co-CEO of Scalable Capital. I'm sure he will explain later a little bit more about his company. And finally, a very warm welcome to Sebastian Külps, who is managing the Vanguard Europe. He is the head of business development. So I think wonderful panel, excellent combination and composition. And to be honest, we have time until 11:40. And I very much welcome also your questions or comments. That would be great to have you as an active part. We have a lot of time left, so we have a lot of time for a discussion. And I would like to start immediately with the first question and maybe your statement, your view. We heard so much from the EU Commissioner on what is on next, but we would like to see and hear your view. What are the next steps from your point of view? And of course, I would like to prioritize. I would like to know, well, what is the most important from your view, second important, third important, and maybe we just start with a very brief statement from all of you on this topic. And who wants to start? Ben, you're looking like this. Please start.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. Very honored to be here. About 1 year ago, we were here as well, and we were then very happy with the just released LETA reports. This morning, again, we're always happy with the words of Ms. Albuquerque. That said, it seems to me that everybody finds their own goal and purposes in the SIU, and of course, our interpretation is that it is all about the retail investor. And we have found that while there are very nice words there, we have not experienced them as yet in the field. So the main purpose for us today is to confirm that these things are underway, and we hope to hear from the industry that indeed the protection, the level playing field, the transparency, the simplicity, the education are all still very much on the agenda. The regulatory framework, and of course I speak a little bit for my home market here in Belgium, is as yet not very conducive to getting more people involved in the economy of our country, in the economy of Europe. Our pension system is as yet not really efficient in the sense that it is very restricted in what it can do. And we feel that Europe-wide investment schemes might be more efficient. So we are still hoping to get all that in place and your presence here today hopefully also puts some, maybe not pressure, but at least thought into the heads of our politicians to understand how important this is to everybody. The treatment of investors in Europe is often still a little bit on the negative side. It seems to be that all people who invest must be rich and selfish, and we are here to tell you that we are actually the most social participants in the economy that you might find. And that said, I would happily pass the word on.
Thank you. I take you at the end if you want, because it's probably better. So let me turn to Nikolaj. Nikolaj, I'm sure you have exact ideas what should be step number 1, 2, and 3. So maybe you can tell us and share this with us.
Yeah, maybe now is not the time to go too much into detail. So I think I'll start from a very high level, and first of all thank the Commission and also the Council for their strategic proposals on how we can build a savings and investment union. On top of that, I would say that now that we have the European focus on the savings and investment union, the need for growth and the need for competitiveness, now's the time for the local communities, now's the time for the local governments and parliaments to react and not sit idle. So I think for all the 27 member states, it's now is the time to go back to your individual parliaments and have the discussion about putting SRU on the agenda. We've probably been a little bit preoccupied with wealth distribution. We've been very occupied with who gets what. Now we need to be focused on who can actually generate the benefit for the union going forward. It's a little bit of a bad timing, obviously, with the geopolitical unrest going on right now. When we have conversations with local governments around Europe, it's pretty clear that they are focused on the defense strategy right now. But I think we have a very good open opportunity to build the link between our defense funding need and the need for a savings and investment union, because basically pension assets are abundant, retail assets are abundant. We know the defense industry is in dire need of capital when it comes to the SME segment of the defense industry, and I think that's where we need to build the tie. So circling back to my original statement, it's important that each of the different 27 member states, they take the messages of the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, and they put it into action on a local level. And then on top of that, I think this is the primary purpose of the original statements made on Capital Market Union. It is to activate capital that enables SME growth, basically. I'm summing it up a lot. And you can't have a well-functioning primary market until you have a well-functioning secondary market. So when we think about what to do to stimulate investments into SME, to secure funding of SME companies, we also have to think about how we write directives and regulation that stimulates price formation, deep sources of liquidity on exchanges, MTFs, because otherwise we're kind of not fixing the plumbing while making sure there's water in the faucet. And that's what we need to do.
Florian, happy to hear your view on your priority list, and there are 2 micros, I think.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much for being here. I wanna start with a reflection of where we are, yeah, and then get to our priorities, because I mean sometimes we only look at the problems and don't look at what we have already achieved. The very fact that I am, as an Austrian, have been able to found a company in Germany which can now operate across multiple member states, and with millions of investors, means that we did a lot of things right, and we have, and we should say thank you to the institutions and to our people to make this happen. We have good stuff, like passporting, which allows us to operate in multiple markets. We have already in various areas a good common rule set like MiFID, and with very good and straightforward principles. And now we need to think about what is required to go into the next phase, in particular to allow pan-European, scalable, pun intended, players to emerge. Yeah, and we heard the right things. The biggest barriers for us are around taxation. Yeah, and I'm not talking about tax-efficient wrappers, pension wrappers. They are important, but I mean, if you look into our home market, into Germany, we don't have good pension wrappers for retail investing. Yeah? All of our pension wrappers are gated by guarantees, by forced annuities. Yeah? So not stuff which is really open for investment firms. It's more like an insurance domain. Yeah? And still we have a very good and emerging retail participation. So we want pension wrappers, don't get me wrong. But there are, even with normally taxed accounts, big hurdles. Yeah? So we have different capital gains regimes in every member state, and that will likely stay like that for a while because member states don't want to give up on this. Yeah? But we should allow firms who operate in multiple markets to pay local taxes on behalf of their clients. That's not possible yet. Yeah? So if we want to open locally taxed accounts in Italy, we have to open a branch in Italy, even though we don't want to really have a branch network there. It's just registering a branch, having a couple of people there, so that you can basically locally withhold capital gains taxes in Italy. And if you add up the numbers and do this in 20 plus member states, it's not really a good business model. Yeah? It's not scalable. Thank you. And so while we urge and really chime into what has been said on basically harmonizing a pension framework across Europe with some common rules, hopefully very capital oriented rules, like no forced annuities, no forced capital guarantees, very open with regards to instruments in those pension wrappers, allow single stocks, allow ETFs, allow LTIFs in those wrappers, and not just force state funds in there, yeah, so to say, and really let people and their advisors, if they choose to, make the decisions in those wrappers. We think, yeah, a step further, one step before is really to also harmonize or allow access of member states to the local taxation rules, which is not possible right now. Yeah.
Okay, great. I share your enthusiasm, Florian, because sometimes we forget what we already reached, to be honest. Maybe we're always criticizing and say we could do better, but we have to admit that we already reached at least some degree of progress. Sebastian, curious to find out the Vanguard position.
Yeah, always tough as the fourth in line to come up with something new. No, look, we at Vanguard, we share the political imperatives of the Savings and Investment Union, and you know, we need to deeper capital markets. We know we need to basically finance essential transitions in Europe. But since a lot's been said, I'm going to try to do this a bit different. So when I joined Vanguard in 2017, I met a gentleman in the United States who asked me, "What are you going to be doing for Vanguard?" And I said, "I'm going to be building their German business." And he said, "Wow, that's a big opportunity. And you got to give those guys a fair deal." And I kind of thought about it, and I reflected on it today, and I was like, well, yeah, it is a big opportunity. And why is it a big opportunity? Because over 40% of household investments still sit in cash in Germany, and it's not very different across Europe. So yes, we haven't really got the buy-in from the citizens to invest in the capital markets. And then when I thought about a fair deal, and somebody's mentioned it before already, it's like, how do you create that level playing field? How do you get people to not pay over 2% for their investments? And we've done a study which actually proves that in Germany, with advice, you're paying well over 2% to actually participate. And that's just too expensive, especially when you've seen, or potentially where returns will be going. So, how do you move savers to investors? How do you get to that big opportunity? And I think that's where a lot's been mentioned. Tax optimization, tax incentivization are good ways to drive that. And I think it would help, and I'm happy to hear what we're thinking about in terms of savings and investment account initiatives. And then from a level playing field perspective, pension reforms, modernizations of pension systems, and it's been mentioned, is a fantastic way to drive that forward. You will get more long-term financing into the, for companies on that matter. You will be able to, have European citizens have more for the retirement. And basically the goal has to be, and we calculated it, in Europe, we have 11 trillion of untapped potential, or let me call it unproductive capital, which is just sitting there. And if we can move that in a correct way, in an efficient way, and in a responsible way into the capital markets, that's what we need to do. And I think then we can master some of the challenges that are ahead of us.
Thank you very much. I think after these introductory statements, it's clear that we have at least 4 topics that we should deeply discuss in this panel. Tax incentives, pension reform is one of it. What can we do to promote SMEs? That's the second topic. Financial literacy, of course, that's always interesting, also from the retail investor side, and costs. I mean, something you mentioned, which is very important from the retail investors side. But let me turn to our representative from the EU Commission, who has really a hard position here. I mean, we were extremely happy to hear Commissioner Albuquerque to speak about this European savings account, because that's something we would like to promote too. And of course the question is, which already was covered by some of the panelists, how should it look like? What can we do all together? And maybe you can give us a little bit more details on this issue.
Yes, good morning. First of all, thank you for having me in this panel. Indeed, it's a bit hard to speak after my boss. She said already a lot, and she did it in a very eloquent way, so it's a bit difficult for me now to, give you more in terms of the political vision. I think that's very clear from the Commissioner intervention, so I'm happy indeed to say a bit more about what exactly we will be doing in the next months. And since we were talking about priorities, and then I'll get to your specific question, I think it's pretty clear if you see our communication that everything is a priority, because all the action, or the large part of the measures that the Commission wants to push forward will actually be front-loaded to this year. And with a few actions that will come next year, just because it was impossible, physically impossible for us in DG FISMA and in the Commission to prepare everything, such a compressed timeline. But I think that really gives a good and concrete illustration of the sense of urgency that we all feel, and that we all want to really push forward the Savings and Investment Union, seeing how important this is for our priorities. And I also want to, if you allow me, just say that I fully agree with Florian when he says that there are lots of good things that are successful in the EU, and I think we tried also to recognize that in the communication, from talented workforce, very skilled workforce, but also if you look specifically our financial markets, we always bash ourselves and also compare ourselves with the US, with the UK, but we have a lot of strengths also in our financial markets. We need to build on that without being complacent, because there are a lot of things that we can improve, as Florian also recognized, and also the other panelists. But turning now to your specific questions, you asked about savings and investment accounts. I think for us, this is really part of the broader picture that retail investors are front and center in the Savings and Investment Union. This is something that is very important for the Commissioner. She made it very clear this morning. And even if we have a specific, let's say, work stream or heading in our strategy, which is about citizens and savings, in fact, if you read the communication, you see there will be a common thread across all the different work streams we are working on, and it's the end investors, the importance of the end investor. Even in some areas which may sound a bit more esoteric, a bit more far, let's say, from the daily lives of a saver, of households, such as how the market works, right? The single market, the integration of financial markets. But ultimately, as the Commissioner said, by removing barriers in the single market, including tax barriers, but also really in how financial market operators function, how financial market infrastructure functions, ultimately, in an indirect way, admittedly, but also in a concrete way, you can have better services, cheaper services. So all of this is really to the interest of the retail investors. But when it comes to, let's say, more consumer-facing actions that we have, indeed, the savings and investment account is something we really want to promote. So why is that? Well, because we see that there is a lot of potential in using these wrappers, these accounts, as a way to offer more choice to citizens, to have simple, easy way to approach capital markets, to do it in a way which is also low cost for them to do, but still giving them a wide choice of investment products, diversification, and so on. Also using all the digital tools and all the opportunities that are offered by technology. And we see that there are many successful examples of such accounts in some member states, but also internationally. We've been talking to colleagues in Canada, in Japan, in the US, and elsewhere to also learn about their experience with these accounts. And we see that there is a lot of potential still to develop these tools in the EU. And that's why we've been working a lot with the member states, collecting best practices, also speaking to industry, to investors, and try to understand whether there are best practices that we can replicate and really recommend to all the member states, so that we can really make sure that these tools are available to all citizens in the EU and not only some of them. Of course, tax incentives are an important element. We cannot deny that. And we see that tax incentives are often a successful ingredient of these wrappers. We know also that we have very limited competence in the EU in terms of what we can do with tax. We cannot harmonize. We don't have the very strong powers to harmonize these tax incentives. But we can definitely recommend to member states the best ways to use those incentives for citizens to access those wrappers. So the idea is that we want to move very fast on this, and we will want to come forward with what the Commissioner defined a sort of blueprint for such a savings and investment account already in the third quarter of this year. And we will soon be also reaching out to industry, again, to member states and to citizens, representatives and investors to see how we can translate the experience, the work on the ground into those recommendations.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this interesting insight. How can we enhance retail participation? And that's why I look to you, Ben. You are the representative of the retail investor. So tell me, let's start with something like financial literacy, financial education. Is that an important part of the cake?
Well, as our dear colleague here says, everything is connected. If you don't understand it, then you're going to fear it. And because financial education is throughout Europe fairly low, although there are some countries where apparently more initiatives have been in place for a long time, and we see exactly that. A larger percentage of the savings is then activated. So yes, indeed, we should start there, and we should start young. We advocate that it should already be in high school. We very much appreciate our national competent authority who organizes the Money Week. We participate in that. We do a lot ourselves. For instance, tomorrow we will have some 2,000 retail investors gathering in Ghent, and we call this a manifestation. But manifestations of investors are hardly at the expense of other people. I came by train this morning. We do not believe that that is the correct way to manifest yourself at the expense of others. I just wanted to say that because I was late arriving here by train. The thing is that you say we don't want to compare with the US. That might be very possible. I would not want to live there at this point in time. But access to investments, there are 5 different channels. Before this, I worked at Morningstar. These 5 channels are simply not available to investors here. We have to go through a bank. We have to go through an advisor. While in the US, there is one market, and we can go straight to the asset manager, straight to the exchange, straight to the company. And this eliminates a number of hurdles. Also, different markets, different exchanges. Some products you can buy at one platform. The other one, you need to open an account at another platform. The registration of such instruments, if we find them to be very interesting, they are simply not necessarily available to us. And as you say, the taxation, the fiscal incentives, we feel, and this might be strange in Belgium because we know we all love to not pay taxes, but the fact that we love fiscal incentives so much is a testament to a lack of financial education, because finding the best way to invest for your purpose would be better independent of such fiscal incentives. So yes, we would start with financial education. That should tackle the misallocation of funds. Misallocation is maybe a strong word because we do believe that savings also help banks put money out back into the economy. Still, given the wealth gap, given the pension gap, a better allocation of funds, a better diversification of financial instruments would help a lot to solve a number of problems, as indeed the investment in SMEs, for the simple reason that most Belgian companies would qualify as an SME.
Thank you, Ben. Financial education, I mean, I'm 33 years in the business, and I think we're talking 33 years about financial education. It's cool, whatever. But maybe things changed, and now with neo-brokers and robo-advisors, things are differently, and young people approach financial education differently. So maybe, Florian, you can tell us a little bit, how do the young people do that?
So when I learned to cycle a bike, I didn't read a book about it. My parents put me on a bike, I crashed, got up again, cycled, crashed, and then third time I was on the go. And while I'm not saying every retail investor should crash their portfolio to zero, I think learning by doing is a very important thing. And I think it's a bit pointless to over-regulate young people with very small amounts, because sometimes, I mean, let them play. My first stock purchase, a US penny stock, went down to zero, cost me some money, but it probably saved me more money for the rest of my financial life than if I had basically read a long book about it. Because I realized not all your eggs in one basket, diversify, don't just listen to some random internet forum. And I mean, this is also what we are seeing on our platform. The young people, they have way healthier portfolios than sometimes we hear from some meta studies. Like if you look at our own data, we see that the young people, they have the most healthy portfolios, the most diversified, the highest share of ETFs. This is what we see with the young people. Yes, they also have some crypto in there, but the portfolios of those young people are quite healthy. Almost everyone has a monthly savings plan, so they are cost averaging into the market, usually in broadly diversified indices. So they are on a good track, and the most important thing, I think, which triggered this financial education by doing is really accessibility. So remove all the hurdles, and it's not just us, and we have other players in the room. So you can do savings plans from €1 a month. A bit pointless. I mean, you're not building a big wealth with €1 a month, but starting with a small amount, you see it every day, you get excited about it, you feel the emotions when it's going down, you start being able to bear some of those risks. And this will save you from a lot of headaches later in life when you have substantial money in there. So having accessibility to the capital markets, making it not too complicated, give those investors the tool to build healthy portfolios, I think is a very important step in financial education, because not everyone wants to read books or listen to long lectures. But still, many do, and that's what we see in the social media world, and there's this whole topic about influencers, and there's a bit of a negative spin, but we should also accept that lots of good platforms have emerged through self-selection. Like, people don't want to listen to trash at scale. So what you see is on YouTube or Instagram, it's the good channels which tend to prevail. Yeah, those who produce good content where clients learn something, and while we need to make sure that we filter out the bad actors, yeah, and ensure that there is transparency, like who is paying you for this video, yeah, and like have some common rules. Like in general, that's a good thing, because we won't bring the advisor back to the youth. They are not interested in talking to advisor.
But maybe short question, how do you, as an investor, how do you recognize that this finfluencer is serious?
I mean, through the very same tools, which basically also filter out trustworthy media from non-trustworthy media. Yeah, I mean, it's basically, you see it from their metrics, you see it from the recommendations, you see it from consumer organizations who point out the bad actors. Yeah, and yeah, like what I see in our home market at least is really that the platforms with the most biggest reach, yeah, like Finanztipp, Finanzfluss, and some others, they're great actors, and they're not there because some public authority gave them a driving license. You are the good player, and hence you are allowed to do this. They emerged because good content and the fair treatment attracts lots of viewers, and people learn something, and then they use it and recommend it to their friends. But sorry.
If I may add, yeah. Engagement, not just of the investor, but the fact that they are willing to debate. We have a young man from Belgium who in about 2 years' time reached about 1 million followers worldwide, simply because he says, this is my analysis, challenge me. And everybody likes to challenge. All investors have the bias that they're smarter than the market. But the fact that they're willing to be challenged, and when an advisor tells you an absolute truth, that is when people put their heels in the sand.
So learning by doing is a good, yeah, sure.
Can I just add to that?
But maybe you take the mic.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. I absolutely agree with everything that was said, but maybe sometimes we should also leave it up to the professionals. Adults in the room. We have imposed on investment banks and banks in general a concept of a research ban, generally. So it's in exchange of commission, you can no longer provide research to buy side. We have all this brain equity and brain trust sitting at the banks that are extremely capable, extremely used, and extremely willing to provide financial research of individual companies. Why don't we allow them to do that one more time? Because they might have, they might have already written the research. It's just that they cannot disseminate it, because it might be sponsored research. It might be under some sort of different embargo. I just think that if we can go back to the times from which we could actually pay for research via commission, both the buy side and the retail community would get access to a ton of more capable people and investment advice, but also background material that provides forward-looking statements. But as long as they have the right disclaimer, i.e. that this is sponsored research as opposed to non-sponsored research, I think that delivers sufficient investor protection. But that at least gives you somebody who's not too much of a fancy finfluencer. Is that the word? Finfluencer? Yeah, No. I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
I think it's a very valid point, and as always, we say it's a matter of transparency. So you have to see as an investor that there is a conflict of interest, that there might be commissions being paid, so you know exactly where it's coming from. So that's, I think, the most important thing. It's the same with the finfluencer. You know, I have to see where does he make his money, because then I understand his business model. But Sebastian, learning by doing is one approach. What is your experience with the financial education?
Well, as you can tell from my accent, I did spend some time in the States, and learning by doing, or I like to call it practice, beats theory. And look, we've talked about pension reforms, and we've talked about how we get people into the capital markets, and pension reforms is one way. I didn't go to school in the US and somebody said, oh, here, you're in 10th grade, I'm going to tell you how capital markets work. No, I didn't get that. But we all kind of feel like in the US, for some reason, people have a better financial acumen than we do here. I'm not even sure they do. But they are engaging with the capital markets because they're given the opportunity to do so through an efficient pension system with which you get your statement at the end of every quarter, which shows, hey, how am I participating in the market? How is the market working for me? And I've got a selection of certain products that I can choose from that will help me in my retirement. Now, there is a qualified approach there as well now where you're trying to actually put some quality measures on those products in the 401k space, for instance, which then is potentially guiding investors into something that might make sense for them in the long term. But in general, I'm just saying through the participation in the markets, that's where you're getting your financial education. You're engaging with it, and that's how you grow with it. So taking it back to a level higher, I think that's something that would definitely boost financial education in Europe.
Okay. Anything from your point of view? I mean, financial education is very national, usually because of the language and everything, and the different cultures, but nevertheless, it is also an issue at the EU Commission, I guess.
Yes, I think you mentioned that we've been hearing and talking about financial education for decades, but here is an anecdote. In the first Capital Markets Union Action Plan in 2015, I'm not sure, so you need to fact check me afterwards. I don't think we really talk about financial education or financial literacy. I can come clean, I was involved in drafting the action plan, so I'm not blaming others, I'm also blaming myself for that. And I think part of the reason is precisely because we've seen it for a long time as anything that has to do with education policy, as something that really is for the member states and that we can coordinate, facilitate, but we don't really change, let's say, with directives, regulation at European level. But I think this has changed the attitude, and it's not by accident that in the mission letter of Commissioner Albuquerque, so the letter that President von der Leyen sent to her to entrust her mission as commissioner for the next 5 years, financial education, financial literacy is singled out. I don't think this was ever done before. I mean, maybe with Commissioner McGuinness before, but I mean, if I go back in time, I do think this is a major change. And I think it's an important change because financial literacy is not something you can change with, let's say, mandating and regulation. It's something you really need to build. And the EU can have a role, I think, although member states are mainly in charge, but we can help. We can try to influence or, let's say, recommend how school curriculum should be designed, because I strongly believe that this has to start from when people are young, and really learning some basic concepts. Given how low the level of financial literacy is in the EU, we really need to start from when people are in young age. Again, it's responsibility of member states to design school curricula, but we can help and we can guide them. We can work together. We have developed, for example, with the OECD, some competencies framework for financial literacy, and so we can also promote those. And at, let's say, more adult, I don't want to say older, but, more adult, you can also have an impact. And there, I think, it's not only about education or lifelong learning, it's also about awareness raising. And I think this is also, now, usually we talk about financial education, but when it comes to literacy, for me, it's a broader concept, and it also has to do with let's, make people more aware of the opportunities of capital markets. That, as Commissioner said, people still see it as a casino, right? As, they say investing and immediately think about speculation. And so awareness raising, must be part of financial literacy. And again, that's where the EU can help. We can work with member states, but also with national associations, consumer associations, support them, coordinate, and all of this will be part of the financial literacy strategy that we will be putting out at the same time as we will put out this blueprint for savings and investment accounts.
Thank you, Andrea. Maybe I have to correct myself. The 33 years that I talk about financial education is mainly in Germany at the national market, not as much in the EU market. I agree with you. I think that's a new aspect. But I think, Nikolaj, you wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something on the point that Andrea made. And by the way, I completely agree. But I think we need to focus on what kind of financial literacy we're trying to build. So, in Belgium, in Sweden, in Denmark, in various member states, we've tried to put financial literacy on the educational agenda. But I also sometimes see that some of the mechanics and some of the systems and processes that are being used are a little bit risky because they speak to the fact that it needs to be fun and it needs to be gamified. And investments are not about games, if you ask me. You need to take it really seriously. And if you think about other topics that are taught in school, it's not like you go into a physics class and here's some gas, and if you put a flame to it, it explodes. They kind of tend to tell you the background for why it's flammable. And so for the schools, they also need to be responsible of teaching you the background. It's not about if you buy 10,000 euros worth of X and it goes up by 10%, you will have made 1,000 euros. You need to explain what is a company, what is a bond. You need to explain finance. You can do it high level, but you need to explain the concept of owning a piece of equity in a company that generates a cash flow which gives you a right to the future cash flow and the future earnings. It needs to be at that level because otherwise you're not going to be doing anyone any favors. So gamification, it's great, it's fun, but you need to show them a little bit of background.
Sebastian.
I just want to make one point on that because I think we're talking a lot about education, except Florian, you touched on it in a bit of a different way, in a push mechanism. And that's kind of what we've done over the last 30, 40 X years, where you went to your bank advisor and he educated you about how you should be investing. We didn't really get it through schools, but even if you got it through schools, we went through a push mechanism. It's changing. We're going into a pull world. And that's what Florian describes. People are pulling their own information off new, let's say, digital platforms, through the digitalization. Now it's influencers. We know what's next. It's going to be AI. You're going to have kids just putting into their chat GPT, what does my optimal portfolio look like? And it'll spit something out. It's going to be a real challenge, but also a real opportunity to manage that pull channel because it's going to be much more powerful, I believe. And I think, the one thing that we can control there is the right transparency. But the right transparency needs to move into understanding. And I think for me, MiFID II was great at trying to create transparency on the cost side. Did it work? No. Because we didn't get the understanding. It was packed somewhere in a lot of documentation and it wasn't really in your face and people still don't understand what they're paying for. So transparency is very, very important for us to gain trust and make sure this pull mechanism works right. And we need to ensure that this transparency is then correctly understood.
Can I maybe add one thing and then tie into your next topic? I have to admit I'm not a professional investor. I'm actually a psychologist. I needed to find a place where the crazy people didn't have too many problems with being crazy, and the financial world is wonderful for that. So when do people learn? When they're interested. I was a guest lecturer in the US on a class on financial planning. The difference to me in Europe and the US is identity. They all see themselves as an investor. I had a conversation yesterday with a gentleman of 67 years old, and he said, I just started investing. But he's been investing all his life, except he doesn't see himself as an investor because his pension savings and his benefits plan at his employer isn't considered to be investing. So the message that we want to send out from a young age to anybody and everybody is everybody's an investor. You are an investor. You're investing your money, your time, you're just not doing it efficiently, and we want to help you doing it better. And if you take that as step one, as you say, the transparency of the information is important, but you only learn when you have an interest in learning. So step one is making sure everybody understands you already are an investor. There's nothing negative about it.
Good point. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, we have one. Do we have a microphone for the lady there?
Hello, good morning. My name is Anna Martin from BEOC, the European Consumer Organization. I would like to actually challenge you a bit on this enthusiasm about financial education, because we are looking now very much into silos on retail investment markets, but BEOC is working across sectors, and we hear education in all different sectors, and there are enormous expectations on consumers to understand all different things. My digital colleagues are telling me that consumers should understand the algorithm system so that they know how the system is working and how is it tricking them. I'm hearing a lot about payment fraud as well, that consumers should understand how different fraud scenarios are working. We have my energy colleagues who are telling me that the industry is telling them that consumers should look into how their energy contract works, how variable versus fixed versus dynamic contracts work. So, and the food colleagues, and I could go on, and that creates a bit of a full-time job, to be honest. And I'm wondering if we are on the right path, because okay, we can teach people basic concepts, how to manage your budget, what is risk volatility, these kind of things. But really understanding which is the right product for you, I do see it much more in the role of advisors. When you are sick, you're going to the doctor. When you have a legal problem, you're going to a lawyer. Why in financial services, when you want to invest, you're not getting an independent financial advisor? So perhaps can we drive this discussion again a bit more in this direction?
Sure, we will try. Florian.
No, I'm happy to take that. In particular, the last part, the independent financial advisor for the majority of our clients doesn't exist. You can't pay this person. Yeah, the hourly rate of an employee in Europe is just too high to get one-to-one advice for people who have a few €100, a few €1,000 a year to set aside. It just doesn't work. It's the wrong model. And we should also stop calling those people advisors. Most of them are salespeople. The independent advisors you can't pay. You can't pay with a few €100, a few €1,000. You're not able to pay those people. And to be honest, you also don't need to. Yeah, because most people's lives are not that complicated that they need super complicated financial solutions. Yeah, the majority of our clients, and it's not different at other investment platforms, whether it's in the US at Vanguard or Fidelity or in Europe at the Trade Republics and Scalables, most clients have rather simple lives and they do very well setting aside a certain proportion of their income into a couple of funds, maybe a few stocks they believe in, and just let it go. Yeah, and that's not something which requires everyday attention. It's not set and forget completely. Yeah, if you have life events, yeah, getting married, you're getting kids, obviously you should spend some time, maybe an afternoon, on a rainy afternoon on Sunday, yeah, to revisit whether your overall strategy still works. But not everyone needs to become a day trader. Yeah, and so basically those who need financial education because they want to become more engaged in the capital markets, they should have obviously access to good, high-quality information, and we should also review those rules, I agree. But most people, it's over-engineered, and it's because a lot of people are earning a lot of money in the chain, but most people don't need that form of advice.
Okay, any further comments, Nikolaj, on this?
No, I absolutely agree, is what I wanted to say. I absolutely agree, but I also want to say that I completely respect the fact that being a consumer and being an investor is getting ever more complicated, but that's just the nature of the world today that we live in. We used to be only have to worry about getting food on the table and warm clothes on our backs. Right now we live in a much more complicated world, and now we need to pay attention to a lot more things. And I also think that we've been a little bit complacent when it comes to the matter of both insurance and also pensions. It's something you just stick underneath your pillow and you sleep with it, and you are used to not having to worry about it. But Florian and I, we were just talking about before, whispering. I think it would be a little bit of an epiphany if we told investors the concept of compounding. And if we told them that they, in fact, did this very early on in their life, what would be their financial capability once they got into retirement. I think in the past in Europe, we've been a little bit complacent due to the fact that we were under the impression that local governments would take care of us. I don't think that's going to be the case going forward, necessarily. So we need to rely on our US equivalents of 401k. We need to focus more on self-funding Pillar 2 investment plans as opposed to Pillar 1 pension plans, which in some countries are very effective, but not that many. And also Pillar 3 pension Pillar 3 retirement plans. And in order to do that, I think probably the silver bullet for me, or what worked on my own family and my own near community, is the concept of compounding, and showing them if you do exactly what Florian is suggesting, if you do exactly what Sebastian is offering, you can get into a very comfortable position if you are when you grow older. And I think that's what people don't really understand. My kids at least were like, where do I sign up, when I explained it to them?
I'm just going to briefly touch on one comment that you made. You said when you're sick, you go to the doctor. And you're right. My dream would be is that just to invest, you're not sick. It's everyday life. You're basically looking to stay healthy. You're basically looking to make simple, smart investment decisions, which shouldn't be complex, which should be transparent, and which should be quite inherent in how you do it correctly. That would be the dream scenario. And I think, people like Scalable are shaping the access to this in a very productive way. So we're getting more people to invest in the capital markets in a sensible way. Savings plans in Germany have gone from 600,000, 10 years ago, or even less, 8 years ago, to over 10 million now. So there's a good movement there. There's a lot of positive there. I'm going to be positive about the advisor. I think there's a huge importance for good advice, but that picks up when complexity picks up. That picks up when people feel like they need advice. And in many cases, when we speak with advisors, and we actually do train advisors through a program that we do at Vanguard, we hear, where are your clients coming from? Oh, they're actually coming from the Scalables of this world after they've amassed maybe a couple €100,000, and they're like, wow, I need to think about different aspects now. I need to think about inheritance. I need to think about maybe tax optimization. I need to think about how I actually navigate a little bit more complex world for me now. I'm going to go get advice. We still have a lot to do on advice. There's still a lot of conflict of interest out there. We know that. There's not that great trust in the advice world, but we have studied that through advice, through good advice, you can gain 2 to 3% of extra performance in terms of what an advisor can get you if he's doing a nice and good holistic advice. But it has to be holistic advice, and it can't be push, sell. And that's something that we need to work on in the industry with advisors.
So one comment from Andrea, and then I think Ola has it.
Yeah, very quickly. No, I don't want to give the impression that financial literacy and education is the silver bullet. I mean, the classic caveat emptor principle, doesn't apply in financial services in the same way as it applies for other types of sales and promotions, right? And the fact that we need good level of financial literacy does not take away the fact that you still need to have the possibility for people to get good value for money products, to have disclosures and information which is done in a way that does not flood them with papers and batteries of tests, as the commissioner was saying. But still, one thing does not exclude the other, and really I don't want to give the impression now that financial literacy will solve all the problems that we have. On the other hand, I think things like compounding, the power of compounding, how many people do not understand it, and such a basic and important principle, right, for investment. Even calculating the impact that 1 percentage point difference in fees can make on your investment. I mean, these are things that we should really have everybody understand, because then it makes it easier for people to let that information that they get sink in without, taking away the fact that that information has to be given in a very transparent way, and that the products have to be good value for money to begin with. So, yeah, one thing does not exclude the other. We have to act on all these axes. I agree.
Thank you. Ola, please.
Just quickly on the issue of advice. I mean, I agree to a certain extent with all the panelists and with what they said. It would be ideal, of course, if people did not need advice, if they would be financially literate, and if they could just use simple tools, and hopefully with the blueprint for ISK, we are going to soon have such a tool, not only in Sweden. However, we should not really kid ourselves. I mean, not everybody is financially literate enough, and I would say bold enough and confident enough to just go on a platform and invest. And this is evidence because many people do not invest. And also we had a study from the European Commission in 2018, and it clearly showed that most of people, when they want to invest, they do go to advisor. I mean, they think they're going to advisor. They are normally going to a salesperson in the bank, and they are being advised. I mean, they're not being advised. They're being sold some products from the portfolio from the bank. The problem also is that most of these people are not aware about the potential conflicts of interest. They are not aware not only about the fact that they are actually would be able to afford this couple hundred of euros of independent advice. They are paying much more in trailing commissions over the years. And Better Finance, in our position on retail investment strategy, we have a case study. We did a case study on the French market. We have compared somebody who has around 10,000 euros to invest, and what do they get when they go and buy a product from a conflicted bias advisor, and what do they get when they pay, I think, 450 euros for, let's say, 2 hours of independent advice. And they're so much better off if they pay for independent advice. So I would say, I hope with the ISK and with a simple tool like that does already also the tax declaration for people, it will change. They will start to invest like in Sweden. They will start to discuss investments, but we are not there. And just the research and the survey from Poland from last year shows that 70% of Polish people do not know what stocks are. So they've heard about them, they don't know what they are, and they do not invest, and they don't intend for the time being to invest. So, of course, tax incentives are great. They can be used to incentivize people. But I think for the time being, also member states really need to think about a little bit advice as well.
Absolutely. Great point. Let's turn to the next topic, and I think we come back to the speech of the Commissioner Albuquerque. She said European investors are often seen as risk adverse, which is quite interesting. And she rightly mentioned, in my point of view, but this is just a matter of the right incentives. So let's talk about what are the right incentives to mobilize retail investors, and what, for example, can we do with pension reforms? In which direction can we go to mobilize the capital that we will need in the next years? You want to start, Ben?
Simply said, in an attempt to protect retail investors, the interpretation of risk is completely wrong in the way that media or government or regulator talks about it. When an 18-year-old goes to a bank and says, I want to invest in stocks, they say you cannot because you don't have any experience. You should start with our fund. How is he going to gain experience in stocks if he's not allowed to invest in stocks? Secondly, long-term investor. At that age, he has an horizon of over 50, 60 years. Why would he not invest in stocks? To reply to Björk, the capacity for learning of human being is luckily limitless as long as they're interested. And let's never waste a good crisis. The fact that we have a crisis means that there's a lot of incentive to learn.
Okay. Any further comments on what can we do? What will be the right incentives to mobilize the market?
Well, we're going through a lot of debate in Germany on the pension reform, so we're probably both on top of this one a little bit. But in the end, I think what's important to me is one, acceptance of a potential pension product needs to be gained, and something that always scares me off is guarantees. Because I think guarantees are expensive, they swallow a lot of performance, and in the end, you don't really know what you're investing into. And a lot of the system is guaranteed already. Our first pillar in Germany is 100% guaranteed. The second pillar is mostly guaranteed. It's all defined benefit. And now, there's the debate on the third pillar, should we guarantee this as well? When the incentives that are being talked about are something like 4,000 euros that you can save into this account on a year, where I'm just like, well, what do we need another guarantee there? Also, when we have relatively good healthcare systems in place as well, that could be deemed as a guarantee in a way. So, I think guarantees to me are something that would lower acceptance, not get younger individuals to invest in this pension, and basically lower returns. So that's something that I would not be for. I think a forced annuity is another thing that I think would lower acceptance. If you're going to have a lifelong annuity on something and you're 20-something years old, you're going to sit there and think twice about, do I want a lifelong annuity on this, or will I just not take the tax benefit and make sure I have that flexibility? And it was mentioned earlier from the commissioner, you know, everybody is and has a different scenario, life scenario in which they're in. Flexibility needs to be there. I also think transferability is important in the second pillar, for instance, where transferability is extremely difficult, and in the end you're caught in a bunch of old contracts. That's not the future. Of course, if we could do transferability across Europe, that would be even better. I know there's a lot of complexities because of the nature of regional taxation, but that would be something that would be a big plus. But those are some of the key things that I think we need to think about, how we gain acceptance, how we get people to invest long term without leaving too much on the table through aspects like guarantees.
Okay. Nikolaj, Florian, you want to?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about two levels of incentives. One is the incentive to drive more retail participation, but I'd rather turn it around and talk about the disincentives that are out there right now and just removing those. So high capital gain tax as an example, ineffective tax structures where you actually pay before you realize your tax gains, those are just stupid if you ask me. And they should be repealed and they should be simple. And one of the reasons why the Swedish ISK is so successful is because it's simple. Everybody understands it as a debit taxation, which is very transparent. It's very predictable. It's based on your account balance going in and going out. Super simple to manage. You don't have to think about when to realize a gain. And that's what happens in most other capital gain structures around the world, basically, is that it's based on realization. So when you realize, you have to think about how much tax do I then have to pay. So the simplicity of the Swedish ISK account is what's really making it really good. And then obviously when it comes to retail money activation, it also needs to be completely not paying attention to which asset class you invest in. It doesn't have to be stock specifically. It doesn't have to be ETFs. It doesn't have to be fixed income products. It can be whatever it needs to be. But there also needs to be some symmetry with capital gain tax or taxation on real estate assets. And Andrea and I were talking about this before. In many European countries, there's a complete asymmetry between how you are getting taxed on your returns on real estate gains versus financial assets. And that needs to be symmetrical across, because otherwise you end up seeing retail investors not going into the financial markets and focused on real estate assets. And then I think we also need to talk about incentives for on pensions as an example. I think we need to provide the pension asset with the pension assets, i.e. the pension funds and the asset owners, with some sort of incentive that drives investments into SMEs. So it's not just about the Savings and Investment Union is not only about activating investors. It's also about making sure that there's channelization of that funds into the SME segments. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that pension funds are maybe incentivized to actually commit some capital into SMEs.
Thank you. Andrea and then Florian.
No, just wanted to add to what Nikolaj said on the simplicity. I think it's a key point, and I don't think I stressed it enough when I spoke about savings and investment account earlier. But when we talk about tax incentives, we immediately think about, you know, the discount that we get, let's say, in terms of capital gains, or there are many other models in which you can give incentives, tax incentives to these kind of investments. But equally important, if not even more important, is the simplicity, right? I mean, as a citizen, a retail investor, you don't want to spend a lot of time navigating the forms that you have to fill in, and how am I going to get, or, you know, I'm even afraid that maybe I'm doing it wrong and then I have a problem with the tax man. So the most successful accounts are also those that make it very simple and automatic for people to fulfill their tax obligations. And I think that's an absolutely must for the success of these tools. And speaking about pensions, and interestingly again, and basically every single topic we touched upon today, the Commission, the EU level doesn't have a very strong, let's say, competence in that area, and it's very much for the member states to bring forward reforms. And I think that also speaks to a more general point on the fact that Savings and Investment Union cannot be built from Brussels alone, and we really need the member states also to do their part, and this is something that we really want to work together with them to make the reform happen on the ground. So pensions, one of such examples. I mean, we can do some things at European level. We have the Pan-European Personal Pension Product, you know, as part of an incentive. If you want to have people invest more for the long term, we will amend the rules for the PEP to make it more effective. The same, we can amend the rules on occupational pension funds, also the Commissioner mentioned it earlier, but the reality is that this is not enough. And if we want to act more, let's say, on the increasing the pension pool available in the member states, then we need to act on things like auto-enrollment, which can be a very powerful way, again, an incentive for people to go more into supplementary pensions, and the transparency. So all these tools like pension dashboards, tracking systems that allow people to really see where they stand at a particular point in time on building the savings, the retirement funds that they will need to continue maintaining a certain lifestyle when they retire. All these are the right incentives also on the side of pensions. And again, I cannot stress more than these are not things that we can regulate from Brussels. These are things that have to happen on the member states, as many others of these incentives that we're talking about.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very important point, because when we talk about tax incentives and the reforms of the pension system, that's of course something that the member states have to take care of. But I think it would be a great step if the EU Commission publishes the gold standard or the blueprint for these systems. And I think this would help a lot, even though it's a national issue. Florian and then Ben? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the question was also about how, about risk-taking and allowing investors to take risk. And I think this is quite a generational opportunity we are having here right now. And I'm seeing very good vibes in the paper, also in the speech of the commissioner, and it's about letting people decide a bit more again in what they want to invest into, yeah, because there was a big trend with regards to investor protection, which really led to less and less products, and some of this has a good outcome. Yeah, I mean, people are buying ETF and index funds, and that's a good core part of portfolios. But it also has very, very bad side effects, and those are about a big funding gap which is opening up. It started with the SMEs, but now that the funding gap opened up really on the highest level, yeah, the member states need the money, the European Union needs the money, the corporates need the money. We are seeing a shift where basically policymakers understand if we want to pair investors with the issuers, yeah, we need to allow a broader investor group, including retail investors, to invest into those products. Yeah? So right now, you can invest into hardly any corporate bond in Germany, yeah, because the issuers stopped registering them for retail. There is so much paperwork for a rather small group of investors compared to all the institutional investors that they just stopped issuing the bonds in the relevant format. Yeah?
And they don't publish a key ID. That's very simple then.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then you saw a similar effect with public companies. There are less and less public companies. A company like ours, 30 years ago, it would be public already. We have no plans to go public. Yeah? Like if you talk to investment bankers, they say, like, you need to have a market cap of 5 billion plus to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, you won't get research coverage for the reasons you outlined. You won't get added to the index funds. And so basically, we need to tackle it from both sides. Yeah? And we see a lot of good things now happening on the investor side, to balance the investor protection with the needs, with the funding needs of the economy. We see good debate on taxation and tax incentives, but we also need to make sure that we have the issuers in Europe again, which basically receive all of that capital. It hurts me every day to look into our dashboard and see how much money is leaving the continent every day. Yeah, I mean, if you buy an MSCI World, it's 60-70% is US. 60-70%. That's the most bought product on any digital platform, is a FTSE All World or MSCI World ETF. Every click, every 100 euro savings rate of every European investor, 60 euros go into the US. Yeah? And you see it in the single stocks the same. Yeah? It's just a much more attractive opportunity set you have there, just quantity-wise. Yeah? I mean, I'm not talking about quality. There are great companies in Europe, but there are less and less companies going public. In the US, we see a similar trend, and we need to turn the trend around. In general, it's probably not something which we completely flip upside down. So there is this other big trend where the European Union had good answers on. It's the whole private markets trend. Yeah. If less and less companies are public, we need to make sure that investors have access to those opportunities in the private markets as well. And the different forms of the LTIF, of infrastructure and private equity and private debt are a very good step in the right direction. And we should make sure that those instruments are eligible for those tax incentivized wrappers, which are now emerging.
Nikolaj, I would come back to you in a minute, but Ben first.
I just wanted to add a little bit. Nikolaj said earlier on learning by doing. Our dear friend here said auto-enrollment in pension plans. Why not employee shares? We haven't talked about that. The best way to get interested in investing is to have an investment. Make sure everybody is aware of what they have in their potential to grow their future. So employee shares on the agenda, please.
Very important part. But Nikolaj, I wanted to come back to you because you are the expert. And I think Florian made a very good point, and we see it in Germany too. We have these young, successful companies, and if they want to go public, then they do not choose Germany, to be very honest. They go either to Nasdaq in the Nordic countries, or they go to the US. So how can we change this?
Yeah, first of all, we'll sort you out. I'm going to give you my phone number. You call me. We'll make sure that you get a good IPO experience. That's definitely not going to be a problem. Yes, I do recognize what you said, Florian, that investment bankers are saying it needs to be 5 billion euros plus in order to do a successful IPO. That might be the case for Germany. But if you think about the Swedish community, if you think about the Danish and the Finnish community, where we actually have a very vibrant SME segment, with I don't even know the number, but it's probably 300 or 400 listed shares and maybe more than 100 listed companies that have migrated from the First North segment to the main market. So that's working really, really, really well. And obviously the background is that you have a very strong Pillar 1 system that has dedicated support towards SME financing. So you have a ton of small cap funds, which primary purpose is just to invest in small cap. And we see very good allocation both from the Pillar 1 pension systems and the voluntary part of the Pillar 1 systems into those small cap funds. And that ensures that you have the necessary financing whenever a new company wants to IPO, which means we can IPO companies all the way down to less than 50 million euros, even 20 million euros. Is it for everyone? Absolutely not. Because being a publicly listed company is not for everyone. It's a lot more demanding, but it gives you a lot of transparency. It gives you good access to talent, because we've learned that employees, they really appreciate working for a listed company. We also know that it gives you transparency with your customers as well. So there are definitely some benefits. But going back to your original point of the 5 million or the 5 billion euros threshold in order to do a successful IPO in Germany, we've heard that from other countries around Europe as well. But I just want to say that that's the same thing as in the US. US investment bankers are also telling investors, or telling issuers as they are defined, If you want to do a successful IPO, it needs to be in excess of 10 billion euros in the US, or 10 billion US dollars in the US, which is not for everyone. And that's obviously a problem. And is it coming from really investment bankers? Maybe it is. Is it coming from the depth of the capital market? Maybe it is. I know exactly how we fix this, and that is by the pension assets taking their fiduciary duty, or the pension companies taking their fiduciary duty really seriously, and making sure that they don't only chase returns. They actually also have some responsibility to drive the well-being of the country in which they operate, also for their local citizens and for their pensioners. And they can do that by allocating more assets towards the local ecosystem, if you want. But call me afterwards.
I'm just going to touch on one point there. Yes, pension funds do have their fiduciary duty, but so do asset managers in terms of what we need to achieve for end clients and retail investors. And I think it's dangerous to use retail investors and guide them or use them as an instrument to finance political goals. In the long run, they will. But I think we need to have a free market system. And Florian, you said, yes, the MSCI world is over 65% US. I still experienced it where Japan was over 50% of the global market. And since then, markets have done just fine. And there was just a shift of capital. And why is it? Because of the competitiveness and the growth and what we've been able to achieve. And I think it's fascinating to see that we have now talked about 1.5 billion potentially entering the European economy through some fiscal packages, which could lead to about 15% GDP growth. And what do we see in our funds? People are selling the MSCI world and they're actually buying FTSE Europe. So there is a mechanism that works, but we need to do our homework here. We need to make sure that the capital that we have trapped, the 11 trillion that I talked about, or 11 trillion that I've talked about, that those find their way into the economy and efficiently. So if we have the opportunity to potentially, well, I don't want to call it opportunity, if there is a 1% spend of GDP on defense, we need to make sure that that 1% lands back into GDP and not 0.6. Bureaucracy needs to be improved. It can't just be the demand side, the Keynesian mechanism that's working. It also needs to be the supply side of it to basically say, let's optimize every dollar. And there's many layers to that, but I think it's dangerous if we start trying to guide retail investor money.
Andrea, please.
Thanks. I just want to go back to a couple of points. The first is about IPOs and public markets. So indeed, this is something that we've been worrying a lot about in Europe in the last years, including, let's say, policymakers, because we all know that we have a lack of IPOs, that many successful companies, they, when they're born in Europe, they grow in Europe, they're very successful, and then they move to the US, and we lose all the jobs. And, from a policymaker's perspective, this is not a good thing to see. So we've been trying in many ways to foster more of an IPOs ecosystem here in Europe, looking from the very narrow angle of financial regulation. We've been trying to readjust, let's say, the calibration between the investor protection side and the transparency with the incentives for companies to go public and stay public. So we had recently, actually in the last years, we had 2 rounds of changes. First, specifically for SME growth markets, and more recently for the whole listing rules, which we now still have to implement. And we took a commitment, actually, in the SIU strategy that when we implement those rules, we will do it in a proportionate way and really trying to respect the new balance that we try to find. But okay, regulation alone cannot solve all the problems, and I think there are many other issues. But then I think the question is, since we have a very thriving private market, how do we also allow investors to access that, knowing that it's less transparent, there are more risks, so we need to take all of this into account. But again, I see as a positive development the retailization, if I can use this term, of the LTIFs, the European Long-Term Investment Funds, also changes that we've made recently to enlarge the investor base. I think it's a very positive development, and let's see. It seems that it's been successful and that more and more LTIFs are being launched. So let's see how that goes. But then we also want to explore, and not necessarily as, let's say, taking away the interest from public markets, but can we also find ways to develop more private markets in a way that is even more accessible, let's say, for a broader, let's say, audience for investors. But okay, something that we will need to study. And the second point I wanted to make is about financing priorities. I think the commissioner also kind of hinted at that, and I fully agree with you. We are not in the business of kind of directing savings into specific investments. And I also take the point that Florian made that, okay, if you want to invest today in ETFs, it's possible that a lot of your money will go outside of Europe. And again, from a policymaker perspective, they're not something, I mean, it's good to see that people are making good returns. I'm happy about that, but I would be even happier that if they were making those returns and at the same time invest in European priorities. Then sometimes I ask myself, why don't we have, I mean, we have the indices in Europe, right? So why don't we have more ETFs in Europe tracking European indices? But then, of course, it's because there is, you know, that the good investment opportunities are not in Europe. So it's not the fault, let's say, of the index. It's not the fault of the fact that, you know, there are not the funds. It's because the companies are not maybe as profitable as they are in the US. But then you see, and you mentioned defense, big interest in defense, defense stocks going up. All of a sudden, you see ETFs tracking European defense industry popping up. So I think, you know, again, these are not things that we can do from a regulatory perspective. We don't want to direct funds, but we also need to understand a bit better how we make this, let's say, virtuous circle start. And okay, I mean, I really think we have an objective and we have a responsibility to find this balance between giving the good returns to the investors, but at the same time, making sure that that investment goes into Europe, because after all, European investors are Europeans living in Europe. So it's in everybody's interest that Europe grows, create jobs, and so on.
Thank you. Nikolaj, I'm sure you want to say something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to say on the matter of ETFs, absolutely they are unbelievably good. And I think you said it from the beginning, that some of the banks, they're selling their own internal products, some of their own managed mutual funds, which are extremely expensive. And by the way, do not create excess returns to the cost structures. So yes, we should do whatever we can to power the journey into a more passive investment trends. But right now we cannot with the post-trade setup we have in Europe. It's absolutely impossible. So there are post-trade reasons for why Vanguard, as an example, does not have any listed ETFs on the Copenhagen exchange, and that's because of the post-trade setup. Same thing as an example up in Sweden. So we need to fix the post-trade complexities that we have in Europe. How that's going to be fixed, that's something you can fix on the regulatory side with CSDR. Because right now, as an example, we cannot offer local access in many of the Nordic countries to a large variety of ETFs because of post-trade complexity and because we don't have the settlement bridges between the various CSDs. And that's something we need to fix, and we need to fix it fast. But then also, and I think you said it from the beginning, I think we also need to focus on a quite recent trend, might not have been a recent trend, but actively managed ETFs is also something, maybe. No, okay. I think
you have any questions? By the way, we don't want to get through it, but maybe you finish first.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's something that we haven't talked enough about, but actively managed ETF is something that can create some well-deserved disruption to the sometimes inherently poor mutual fund industry, and it's something that we should try to expand more together.
Gertrude, I think there was a question from you.
Hello? Yeah. As a representative...
Could you use the micro?
As a representative of financial consumers and pension fund participants, I have to make a comment to Mr. Kosakewitsch's, Nikolaj's statement about utilization of pension fund capital for financing the European transformation in the widest interpretation. I would like to say from our perspective a very clear and rigid no, stop. Hands off from pension capital to finance any social political transformations per se. Because what we learned in Austria is that our pension funds are the best pupils in the world for financing the Green Deal, yeah? And the participants of the pension funds and also the pensioners get at the 1st of January a letter, dear participant, from tomorrow you get a reduction in your pension of 18% from one day to the other because of low performance. And we have many pensioners who have already lost more than 50% of their pension. So my clear message in this context is, yes, using European capital for a social political project is important and legitimate, of course, but before financing such project, they must get a sweetener or a support from government or from the public or a tax incentive so that it becomes an investable product with a market comparable return. This is very important from my perspective.
Thank you for this important comment. Nikolaj, I think you want to take
No, I just wanted to clarify a few things. I absolutely agree that I think Andrea said it and Sebastian said it earlier, that it's very difficult and something that you shouldn't avoid to create more than incentives, actually mandatory investments into certain investment themes or asset classes or politically motivated structures. I completely agree with that. But where I believe that we're missing a huge opportunity is that when too much pension capital migrates into the US, and one of the reasons for that is that companies like Florian's company is saying, we cannot raise capital, we cannot create an IPO, we cannot run an IPO in Europe, which is why we're choosing to do it in the US. We also have a lot of pension assets that are deliberately saying, our SME financing journey is done through venture. Fine, that's good. But the trick with venture is that as soon as you do a C round or a D round, you automatically invite US venture capital into such a venture-owned company. And once you have US venture capital in such a venture company, I can guarantee you it will IPO in the US. So in this particular case, you've seen pension contribution into startup SMEs, but you've also created a structure where it automatically migrates to the US, and that becomes a very bad negative spiral. And I think that's what we need to ensure first, that the pension assets are predominantly or has the structure to stay in Europe, has the necessary frameworks to stay in Europe and support European growth.
Okay, I just got the sign that we should roll up this discussion. I guess the coffee break is waiting, and I think we can continue discussions in the coffee break. But first of all, let me say thank you to this highly sophisticated panel and for these excellent contributions, and please enjoy the coffee. I think we deserved it.
Sorry. We will have the coffee in 20 minutes. Thank you for a very exciting discussion in the panel. We definitely need in the EU savers money. Both companies and the governments need savers money. I would say, help us, help you. Please provide better returns. Don't force us to look for the returns overseas. Do provide value for money. And this brings us to the keynote speech of the member of the European Parliament, Eero Heinäluoma, who is going to talk about value for money and delivering value for money. Thank you for accepting our invitation.